Welcome back to Weekend Breakfast with me, David Bull, joined by Dr. Renee Hunderkamp. Good morning, you two. This one says, may I suggest that Renee should chew on a bulb of fresh garlic for your chest thingy?
I won't have any friends, though, will I?
Well, you haven't got any anyway.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, it does work for some, apparently. Thank you very much indeed. Phil says, treating people at home will not work whilst people are unable to heat their homes or pay for heating. And Ian's got a very funny sense of humour. He says, David, I really have to doubt your medical credentials if you think your prostate is close to your heart. That's not what I said, was it?
I like that.
Do you think that's funny, do you?
Yeah.
That's why you have no friends. I think this is quite good. John in Lincolnshire actually says closing cottage hospitals was an act of lunacy, and I think there's something to be said about that. Absolutely. Right, let's move on now and look through this morning's papers. I'm delighted that we're joined by Julian Drucker, who is 5 News correspondent.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much, David.
Could you say it with more?
I'm just reading this tweet about your shirt. Someone's very upset, says you're wearing a pub shirt.
What is a pub shirt?
It says,
That's what waiters wear.
dressed in a pub shirt, showing off your chest.
Thanks for that.
So like
Shall I get you a medallion?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Well, I don't like you two sitting together. Separate. Right. Shall we move on? I'm sorry about my pub shirt, but there we are. It's not actually a pub
It's
shirt.
very nice. Very
Thanks very
smart.
much. Well,
Don't
you
know
know.
pub. They've been to, but...
Right, anyway, let's move on. Shall we talk about... what have you got first? The
It's an
Observer.
interesting morning. There's lots of different stories in the papers, no one leading on the same thing. But this Observer story, this exclusive picture of Michael Gove and David Lammy on the front. So there's been this gathering in the last few days. This obviously wasn't reported till today. This happened on Thursday afternoon. An extraordinary, it says, cross-party summit, bringing together Leavers and Remainers, including Michael Gove, members of the Shadow Cabinet as well. And they were discussing Brexit. This happened on Thursday at Ditchley Park in Oxfordshire. Documents from the meeting obtained by the Observer describe it as a private discussion under the title, How Can We Make Brexit Work Better with Our Neighbours in Europe? So they all got together, discussed Brexit. People like Michael Howard, who were pro-Brexit, Gisela Stewart, people on the other side, David Lammy, John Healey from the Labour Party, and they discussed, what happened over the last sort of 5-6 years and what happens next.
And so I am naturally suspicious of that coalition of people, and I'd like to know quite what's going on. I mean, clearly, and I was there at the epicentre of all of this, the reason that Brexit hasn't worked is because we haven't Brexited. Now, there will be some sort of resolution, we think, next week. That depends on how resolved we are with the European Union. And the fact is, we'll talk about this later, about the Horizon programme as well, because they're using this as a tool. This is the science grouping that we were a part of and could be a part of. But it seems to me that they're kind of trying to unpick Brexit, unless I've got that wrong. But you've got to remember that the majority of people did vote for this, and now we have to make it work.
Yeah.
It is... It's strange that it wasn't declared. I mean, this was only obviously 4 days ago, but, these are public servants.
So you think we should have known about it?
Well, at least known that this summit was going. I mean, there are lots of summits, aren't there? But it's an unusual coalition of people, and we don't really know we know what was discussed, but we don't know what their conclusions were.
I just think as well, we're going into a period where we're going to have a Labour government, I suspect, and suddenly we're talking to Labour, who we know want to go back into Europe.
Starmer says he doesn't.
Yeah, but that's another lie. God, there's so many lies this morning. And
disingenuous truths.
And we're allowing these people to come to the party and just unpick Brexit slowly. And I think the longer it doesn't happen, and the worse our economic situation is, not because of Brexit, but because of everything else that we're doing to the country, it will enable people to say, look, it just doesn't work, guys. Let's go back.
How are you? I mean, obviously you are a journalist, but just your take on this. Do you feel the narrative has changed, Julian, to the extent that, as Renee says, that actually everything is being blamed on Brexit? We have the highest tax burden in 70 years. We know people are really struggling. Everything seems to come back to Brexit, and from my point of view, it's simply not true.
Well, it does and it doesn't. It's interesting, in the Tory party, it's settled. They're done with it. And it's, as you say, it's Labour, potentially the next government. It could, not split them, but this is the concern for them. There are lots of issues about Brexit that are not settled, and as it says in the Observer, it poses a real threat to the success of any future Labour government, because they haven't really had debates about stuff like, increased trade friction, that sort of thing. So it's a problem from 2016 for Labour in the future, but for the Tories, it's.
I mean, for me, what's going to be interesting is what happens next week and what is the fudge, because there will be a fudge.
This is the Northern Ireland Protocol.
This is the Northern Ireland Protocol, which, as you remember, of course, we've got a border in the Irish Sea and basically leaving Northern Ireland out of the rest of the United Kingdom and putting up trade barriers. There's a lot of talk about these different lanes, green lanes, yellow lanes, red lanes, and all the rest of it. I have no idea what they're going to come up with.
I think any compromise that we see on the Northern Ireland Protocol is a fudge, because there is no compromise to be had on the Northern Ireland Agreement. They are part of the UK, and we need to treat them as such. So any compromise is just a fudge. Europe has borders with other countries that are not part of the European Union.
That's the bit that no one ever talks about.
I know. This is just a tool. It's always been a tool. They negotiated it such so that they could use it as a whip.
They did it well.
They did it well, and we let them do it. This was so predictable by everybody involved, and they let it happen.
So Julian, just in terms of the high-ranking politicians here, was there anyone from government there? So you got Gove,
Michael Gove. I mean, he's not cabinet, is he?
No.
So I suppose he's the most senior. Yes. So that was as high as it went.
And David Lammy, that's a very interesting character to be there.
It is.
Because he's known for his noises off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What is his role at the moment? I forget. His shadow. I mean, he could potentially be London Mayor in the future, possibly.
Oh, my
it could
goodness.
be Foreign Secretary in a couple of years' time. Gisela Stewart is now no longer an MP, is she, I think? I'd have to remember.
I don't think she is. I always found her to be quite credible and quite thoughtful. Yeah. So the question is,
she was by the bus, wasn't she? Those famous pictures of Boris.
She was. So maybe they are. I don't know. And where do we think this is going next? And because I haven't seen this reported. I mean, there was some mention of it this morning, but that it hasn't been widely reported.
No,
yet.
It was a private meeting.
Absolutely, yeah. It feels like there isn't the bandwidth in government to talk that much about Brexit. Really. So as I say, it's a Labour thing now rather than a
But
Tory
surely
thing.
this needs to be cross-party to say that we're in this position now and as a country we need to move forward and this is how we do it. That to me is a much more sensible solution than having party politics. And René's point is really valid, which is for all those people, particularly in the north of England, who voted for Brexit, they are being let down and we're going to see this unravel if we're not careful.
For everybody, wherever they are.
Yeah.
I mean, I voted for Brexit, and I'm not ashamed to say that. Everybody's being let down.
Some consensus in politics, though, is sometimes a good thing, possibly.
Yeah, it can be.
We always like to say politicians should be agreeing on things.
Well, it's nice to see some grown-up politics sometimes, but it doesn't always happen. Let's talk about Richard Sharp now, because this seems to get messier and messier. This is the BBC chairman.
Yes, this is a person most people haven't really heard of until a few weeks ago.
But do pay his salary.
Well, exactly. It's such a weird role, isn't it, BBC chairman? And they have links with political parties. I mean, this happened before, probably when you worked at the BBC. I remember a guy called Gavin Davis, sort of 20 years ago. He was a Labour donor. Richard Sharp is a Tory donor. But anyway, this report has come out from DCMS, Department of Culture, Media and Sport. Basically, he's on the at-risk register now, isn't he, Richard Sharp? He's... his job is definitely in peril. It says, he undermined trust in the BBC and the public appointment system by failing to reveal his role in facilitating his loan for Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister of up to £800,000. So a damning report that's come out over the weekend. He's obviously going to have to come out and speak about it. But very hard to see how he's going to continue as BBC chairman.
And again, Julian, I don't know if you agree, this is it's like the Nadim Zahawi. Any of us with half a brain knew the moment this story broke that this position was untenable. And we've allowed it to drag on, we've had an inquiry, all of these things cost money. And now he's in a point where I think he's going to have to resign.
Yes.
But he could have done that 2 weeks ago. It was untenable that a man who got his job, appointed by the Prime Minister in part, who arranged a massive loan for him, helped to arrange the introduction, keeps his job.
It's because it became a Boris Johnson story, and obviously he's no longer Prime Minister, so it doesn't, we're used to reading about different affairs he's been involved in. So Richard Sharp was the sort of secondary character in it, but obviously he is the more important person now because he is the BBC chairman. And he's still hanging on. I assume he's going to say something in the next couple of minutes.
Well, it is extraordinary, and of course the BBC is under increasing sort of pressure at the moment to provide evidence of its neutrality, which is seriously in doubt. And of course, it is a very very strange story in that he was approached by this Sam Blythe character, and then obviously who was a distant cousin of Boris Johnson, which again is very strange in itself. And then to help get Boris Johnson this loan, and then, surprise, surprise, he becomes BBC chairman. Now, he denies ever providing with Johnson with financial advice, but also didn't declare it. So if you are going to an interview panel where you are looking to be the chairman of the BBC, you would say, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I have ties to the Prime Minister and I may have facilitated some sort of loan.
And then he says he got the
known.
It should be known.
He says he got the job on his own merits.
Well, he may well have done.
I mean, he obviously would say that. I just think people don't really understand the role of the BBC chairman, and it's not hugely interesting in terms of you know, the BBC. But you know, for people to trust the BBC, it needs to be a role that is impartial.
We mustn't forget here that if people don't pay their licence and get a fine and don't pay their fine, they go to prison.
Yeah. Do they still go to prison?
If they don't pay the fine.
If they don't pay the fine.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is also, at the moment, and I think the trust in the BBC is already at such a low, that this is really another hammer blow, and I know there are insiders who are absolutely livid about this, because, of course, they're trying desperately to salvage it in an increasingly difficult world, digital world. It's very hard. And the BBC I work for is a very different BBC to the one that now exists.
Yeah, people under 40 don't understand what a big deal it was for us growing up. You know, the BBC did the sort of heavy lifting on our culture, didn't it, living in Britain? Whereas now it's just another service, isn't it, really? So it's not quite as important to younger people.
So how long's he got?
Few days.
48 hours.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, I bet you, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, Nicola Bulley, what's the latest on this?
Obviously we were talking about this yesterday. Simon Harding writes in the Sunday Times. He's a former murder squad detective in the Met. He's brilliant, actually. You see him on lots of TV documentaries. He's given his view on the case, and interestingly, how he thinks Lancashire police have been dealing with it. I mean, there have been no updates from them really since they sort of said something on Friday. They were keeping an open mind about the case, which seemed to roll back on what they'd said the previous week. They'd said, you know, she fell in the river, etc., etc. He is saying, Simon Harding's saying, that the police settled on this tragic accident theory quite early on. They made their thinking public, and he says it's a bit of a mistake to have done that because, you know, they weren't 100% certain about what happened. Obviously, they can't be. But it's meant that it's closed off people phoning in with information. It's meant that people have gone down to the scene because they're not looking for anyone else. You've had all these sort of TikTok sleuths going down and trampling over potential evidence. Frankly, he says, you know, it's a bit of a mess, and it means that the public have not been inclined to call in with information, which is crucial.
And apparently now someone has called in with some information now, and says there were some unusual people in the village the day before. So now the police are investigating that and looking at CCTV.
It's a complete mess. He says, obviously, you know, the police have had 500 messages, so people are still calling in spite of.
So it remains an open case. I mean,
absolutely, yeah. But it reminds you of things like the Yorkshire Ripper case, where police became waylaid by, there was a hoaxer, wasn't there, back then, called Wearside Jack, I think his name was, with fake tapes. But it is one of those cases potentially where police are chasing the wrong thing and they've ignored all the potential evidence that is out there.
I mean, we get trained on this in medicine, don't we? That it's fixation error, really, that they fixate on the wrong thing.
And we saw everything else.
We've seen it time and time again. We saw it with Barry George, the Jill Dando killer, that they decided that this local, you know, oddball man fitted the crime, so they fitted the crime to him. And sadly, he went to prison for 7 years. They were wrong. But in all of that time, in that 7, 8, 9 years that goes by, any credible chance of finding out who really did do this is gone.
And you make a really good point. In medicine, it's about diagnosis bias, that, isn't it? Where you have a theory and you fit all the facts to make that theory, rather than the other way around, where you actually use the facts to construct your theory. And maybe that is what the police have done here, but obviously desperate to show the public that they've done something, they've done the right thing. I mean, at the end of it, and we spoke about this yesterday, is a family grieving for the loss.
I saw the interview with the husband. My colleague Dan Walker did on Friday night. You know, such an emotional interview.
And 2 young girls.
Yes, but also, you know, if people have information, they can only call a 101 number. So you may sit there for.
Well, I once called 101, and I sat on the phone for an hour before I got answered.
Are you kidding?
No.
Wow. So, just in terms of the ongoing inquiry, it remains the police obviously looking at these other new leads.
Yeah, Simon Harding is saying, the police need to come out more. The senior investigating officer needs to explain what's going on. There is lots of stuff we don't know. Sort of Fitbit data has been talked about. He wonders if the police do know more than, obviously they know more than they're letting on, but how much more do they know? And they should give us a sense of the direction of their investigation.
It still seems incredibly odd as a case.
Yes.
Lots of things don't make any sense at all about it. Let's move on now to the Mail, if we can.
Yes.
And this riot in Liverpool, we didn't talk about it yesterday. I was waiting to see what would unfold, and really, it's shocking what happened.
This was obviously
There's more to this, apparently, as Julian was telling me.
Friday night. There was hints of this yesterday, and lots of the press weren't sort of confident about reporting this, but lots of it was sparked by this video on social media in the last few days showing a man who's in his 20s talking to what seems to be a schoolgirl who's around 15 apparently, and asking her for a phone number. So they're saying the 25-year-old man is a migrant, and he's sort of flirting with this teenage girl. Police have arrested a man in his 20s in connection with that video, but it is that video that sparked.
So then my understanding was there was a peaceful protest, mostly by children and women outside this location, and then it turned ugly.
Yes, well, we saw the scenes of, police vans, a police van being burnt out.
What I'm finding really interesting about this story is that it was branded yesterday as a riot by right-wing activists, far right-wing activists. And the same happened in London yesterday when there was a protest by parents against drag queens reading stories to small children at the Tate. And that was also branded as a far-right protest. And actually, these were concerned parents who were concerned about their children.
But wasn't this hijacked later?
Well, it may have been hijacked, but it's still the press reporting of none of this came out initially.
No, it didn't.
There were parents worried about migrants harassing their children. And this is what worries me, that if you stand up now and say, no, I'm not happy with this, I'm not happy with drag queen storytime, I'm not happy with migrants harassing my daughter on the way to school, you are a far-right protester. This needs to stop. Let's forget these labels of left or right, and let's just talk about people who are unhappy.
And so where does the blame lie with that? Is it in the reporting from the news outlets?
Well, even the Mail is saying far right, but you're right that, any protest gets infiltrated by people on the left. Lots of Grenfell protests got infiltrated by the far left after a while. It seems.
But this allegedly had young people in balaclavas and hoodies and all the rest of it hurling things, and clearly
Eventually.
So they clearly had hijacked what started off as, I believe, a peaceful protest, and people are within their rights to protest about this.
They are, but when you have trans radical activists in balaclavas hurling abuse at protests, they're not called far-right activists, they're called trans activists.
But you see, I think this underlines a much bigger problem, which we are not dealing with, which is the migrant crisis in general.
Yes.
And the government still isn't doing it. And the hotels. And people, quite frankly, have had enough. The fact is that we're spending, £7.5 million a day, which is a day, on housing these people. I see nothing from the government yet. I think the government also knows it's in serious trouble and has to sort this problem out, and quickly, because this is going to turn into a massive electoral issue. And actually, it could be one of the reasons the government is.
And I think we'll see more of this, because I think people, especially in these small towns where the hotels have been taken over, all of their businesses are gone because migrants don't go sitting in restaurants and cafes. I think people are going to get tired, and they are going to start reacting.
Because lots of councils have tried to suppress this kind of thing, and for them it's a logistical problem. Of course, sometimes it's not about who the people are in the hotel, but they can't deal with hundreds of people coming in overnight. So we've had in lots of areas, and it hasn't really been reported in lots of areas because councils have tried to suppress it in the first place.
And we don't know who these people are most of the time, don't forget.
No, we don't. Let's move on to something extraordinary now, shall we? The Brits.
Were you watching last?
I just saw that. No, I wasn't. I was in bed, but I saw the pictures this morning. Did you watch, Julian?
I did watch it all.
Did you?
I did watch. The performances were fairly good, pretty good. Sam Smith, great performance.
Nice outfit.
Nice outfit. I don't have the vocabulary to describe the outfit. Yeah.
Did you like it?
What is it?
I have no idea.
He didn't wear. That's right. Sam Smith didn't wear this for their performance during the Brits, but the outfit on the red carpet is.
He's definitely got a corset on.
Really. Yes, well, I mean,
He has not got
I mean,
a
it is
waist like that.
extraordinary. I mean, I know there's been a lot of crits this morning about it not being a very good show, about it wasn't hosted particularly well, that it's almost become, I don't know, people are dressing up to, but has that always happened where people have dressed up to make a name, to make an image? And,
It's like Jerry Halliwell falling out of her union
Well, that's right.
dress
Yeah.
25 years
I
ago.
mean, their big mistake, when it became less interesting, was when they decided to get rid of gendered awards. So we had, Best Artist with no women in it. And we have half the number of awards.
Yeah.
Let's not forget. So, women are the losers again here. And it makes it less interesting, because would you not have liked to have seen Beyonce as Best Female Artist and Harry Styles as Best Male Artist?
She won international
She
artist.
did.
I mean, people say, like the Turner Prize, you don't have gendered categories. It's just, which is the best work of art. It's the same with...
But there's a big difference between a male voice and a female voice. Art is art.
True.
Ooh, very
True.
good, Renee.
Do you like Wet Leg, David? That's not the house band of the...
I can't have no response to that.
How's your prostate?
It's
the
great.
Incontinence Association. That's a band from
Oh, is
the
it?
Isle of Wight.
And
They
do you
won
like
Best
Wet
Group.
Leg?
Well, I'd never really heard them at all last night. They're a bit like, for our older listeners, sort of Steel Eye Span.
Right.
That sort of...
Very
yeah.
good. And what was the best performance for you last night?
It's
Julie?
probably Lizzo, but obviously...
You're
it's
so
always,
down. I don't know. You're so down with the kids.
it's always awkward at the Brits where the international acts are better than the British ones. I think anyone watching would say...
I mean, also, I just thought it was interesting. It was on the Saturday nights in the O2. The O2 was absolutely rammed. So, I mean, clearly they're desperate to reinvent the Brits and to make it acceptable and open for.
Well, next
for
year we'll
everyone.
have gendered awards again, won't we?
I would have thought so. Yeah.
They can't go back on it, can they?
No. Anyway, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so
Julia.
much,
Very,
David.
very nice to see you. Thank you very much indeed. After the break, we'll take your calls, your thoughts, and your messages. This is Talk TV, broadcasting live from London.